Well, Ernest, thank you for joining us. This is number 15 of our podcast. So again, just started it earlier this year. I give you a little bit of insight about to why I started it, predominantly to talk about drones and politics, just how really both are kind of converging, especially over the last month. There's been a lot of news about DJI and Chinese drone components. I don't know how much that's has affected you, but I thought you would be a great guy to bring in to this podcast because you're doing something really no one else is doing with drones. And so if you could talk a little bit about what you're doing with drones, and then we can go a little bit backwards of how you got into that.
Okay, so what we're doing with the drones is we're doing coastal restoration. So that's comprised of seeding clams, seeding oysters to a certain extent through other methods, doing seagrass plantings, mangroves, and spartina. Mangroves and spartina are mainly in the marshes to help stop erosion. Seagrasses and clams are as in the estuaries, like you would think. So before we started doing what we were doing with the drones, it was all done by hand. And that's kind of what got me interested. I thought there's got to be a better way. And so I started looking into the drones, the heavy lift drones, and we work with Helio out of Houston. They're American made, of course. And once we did that, then we hooked up with Jacob and his crowd, and we started trying to put together how we're going to make all this work together and what we're going to design, which we now have 2 patented processes, one for clams and one for seagrasses and aquatic plants, and 1 patent pending for the oysters.
So one thing that might, I think, be helpful is to actually visualize what this looks like, both for Jim, who I think he's probably seen some videos over the last few years as we've been working together, but definitely for all of the viewers that may have seen Develop Air on our podcast so far, or any of the content that we've produced previously.
Cleaning potential, and a team on the first coast is making it their mission of cleaning rivers in Florida and doing it with the power of Clam. Tonight, how the team is taking its efforts to a higher level.
These are not small drones that Ernest is working with.
Correct, 145 pounds maximum
A
takeoff.
scientist and a drone pilot. Their goal, cleaner waterways.
We're under threat for water quality.
Their secret weapon, baby super clams.
They're 2 millimeters.
2 years ago, Dr. Todd Osborne, a biochemist with the University of Florida, and clam farmer Mike Sullivan teamed up to pour clam larvae, cup by cup, into the Matanzas River in St. Johns County. And now they've advanced their mission
They'll take off and fly to here.
with a drone that drops these tiny clams by the thousands into the river. Clams act like filters.
They clean water. They take particles out of the water, and that's a great thing for our waterways and to keep them healthy.
It helps everybody that lives in Florida. It helps the economy because it creates jobs, promote tourism, which is more jobs.
Sullivan has a shellfish hatchery in Crescent Beach.
Probably 150 in there.
And he knows what happens when a river goes bad. His whole clam farm in New Smyrna in the Indian River got wiped out in 2011 and 2013 by brown tide.
But there were survivors, and we found those, and that's what we bred to get these.
He restarted here in St. Johns County, and those survivors he brought with him are called super clams.
These were found right out here.
Now Sullivan breeds millions of them to sell to farmers and to restore riverways. And here at Sullivan's place, these really are the granddaddies of the Matanzas River super clam. These are still producing the little tiny clams that are being dropped by the drone in the Matanzas River. Ernest Hale's drone can carry 50 pounds of clams at a time. He engineered a
50
drone
pounds, that's a money.
that carefully drops the baby clams and keeps them wet.
Which is the key to the whole operation, is that the clams themselves can't dry out. These guys can't get dry or they're not going to survive.
It's hard to see, but the drone is actually dropping 1 million clam babies during this session. But why drop clams from a drone?
If we put them out in a very dispersed pattern, but consistently, then the predators really have to work to get at each one of those. And so the theory is that that's going to increase the likelihood of survival.
Survival of the clams can give rivers a better chance
So
of
it's not a little
overcoming
diffuser
human
that
population
a spreader plate.
along
Yeah,
the
it's
banks.
spinning and
So this special ops team is dropping millions of baby clams into the Indian River Lagoon in Central Florida, where Sullivan had to leave, as well as here in the fairly healthy Matanzas River.
And so we're trying to be a little proactive here in St. Johns County and Northeast Florida, really.
To better clams
And more clams.
and more clams, millions.
That's great.
so I'm just curious, are those big, just a question off the side, are those big clams, are these clams edible?
Oh yeah,
It's even
yeah.
the big ones are edible?
Yeah, they're edible.
Yeah.
In fact, you can eat them raw.
Yeah, I
So
love
they're-
all the
they're
shellfish
pretty good.
stuff. And
But the thing that that we're doing that is really beneficial to the waterway is we're in the past what they did was they'd take 50,000 or so adult clams, put them out, put them under a net, and then when they spawn, they would just hope that that spawn would regenerate with clams in the river. So what we're doing is we're taking the most critical stage of a clam's life is from the egg to a juvenile. And juveniles are what we're putting out. And they're juveniles when they first form a shell. And so they float down the water column as larvae. Then when they get to a juvenile, they form a shell. And at that time, they drop out of the water column and they hit the sand. And when they hit the sand, they bury in. And there they start their life cycle. So we're raising them in a nursery through that critical stage and putting them out just like they would be out in Mother Nature. So we just spread them in a homogeneous method over a large area. So we'll put 1 million an acre. And these clams are like sand grains.
Yeah.
They're tiny. 1 to 2 million.
Of the million that you put out, what would you say is the success ratio? What percentage of them make it to adulthood?
So if you look at what happens in nature, it's 5 to 10%.
Wow. Okay.
So we've seen 13% survival, but that's I think mainly because we pick the areas that we know are going to be good for clam survivability. And so as long as we're in that 5 to 10, what we're doing is not only restoring clams, we're restoring the food web.
Yeah.
Because a lot of stuff eats these little clams through their life, and so
Not just people?
not just people. So we want predators. We want the fish to come in and the small fish and and everything that clams are kind of the base,
Like
base of the
keystone sort of
food.
species,
Yeah,
right?
base of the food web for a lot of things, and so that's why we're not upset if we got 5% survival.
Yeah.
Because they're doing what they're supposed to do, and then as we keep putting more clams out, we'll start overcoming some of the issues with the water, because that kills them. You have the algal blooms get up, and we'll start producing more clams than predation will come after, or at least even it out. And right now we're way behind because back in the Indian River Lagoon, which is where we're working, it used to be the sportsman's paradise in the U.S. People think about Venice, Louisiana, for fishing, didn't compare. And people say,
And wait, where is this in Florida that you're talking about, or
Indian River Lagoon.
Indian River
It
Lagoon.
goes from it's 153 miles long, and I'm not sure where it starts. It's somewhere up around Orlando, and it ends up down by West Palm. So it's almost the entire East Coast.
Wow. Okay.
And so they say that before the clams started being harvested, that when you went out if you were wade fishing, it felt like you were on cobblestones because there's so many clams in the water. And so what happened in the late 80s, early 90s, which is hard to believe that it was not that long ago, there were no regulations on harvesting clams. And so a lot of the commercial fishermen from the Northeast found out about it, and they came down and were taking clams out by the railroad car.
wow?
And they say they took 9 billion clams out of the river. People think it was probably a lot more than that.
Gosh, billion with a B.
Yeah.
And
Because
so,
again, you got to think, what is it? 1 million, 2 million clam seeds per 12, 13 minutes you're able to deploy.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
I mean, talking
so
big numbers.
We
Yeah.
can put numbers out. But what happened was when they devastated the clam population, then the algal blooms started happening because
Right.
they weren't in there to clean. And it's not, the Indian River Lagoon has some oysters, but clams are really the most predominant shellfish there, or filter feeder. And so when the algal blooms started taking over in 2011, they had a really bad algal bloom, and it killed a lot of fish and shellfish. And so that's when Todd Osborne, who's a professor at the University of Florida Whitney Labs, he and 4 colleagues went out for 2 months looking for clams, and they found 38,
Gee.
and that was it. And they were separated, so they were never going to reproduce because they weren't in proximity to each other. They've got to be in
Why not
proximity.
just swim over them?
Yeah. And so they took those clams they found into the lab and started growing them in the nursery, and that's the offspring that we're putting out now.
Wow.
They're deemed to have a better DNA because they survived those really bad algal blooms,
Yep.
so that they're a little more.
So let me ask you a question. 50 years ago, did those algae bloom, right? Were they happening 50 years ago?
If
Or
they
not to
were,
the
it wasn't to
extent-
this extent. So what's happened, with with development,
Yeah.
you get runoff going into retaining ponds, and then they go into the Indian River Lagoon. Everybody's putting fertilizer out. There are golf courses with fertilizer.
Yeah.
There's septic systems. So there's a lot of nutrients going into the Indian River Lagoon. 50 years ago, there weren't that many houses, and all the clams were there, so things were balanced out.
I worked in for 20 years. I was with the tourism marketing company here in Atlanta, and we did a ton of business in Florida. And probably about 7 years ago, there was a really bad algae bloom that happened on this area down here, Treasure Coast area, I think. And it shut tourism down. People who were scheduled to, come for vacation, they canceled because the water was red and it would irritate your skin, and all these dead fish were washing up on this. So it is a serious problem.
It's very
so what you're telling me is that what you guys are doing could help address that.
Correct.
Yeah, that's
It will help address that.
that's a lot of money that's they're
The
spending.
tourism in Florida that is Florida.
Yeah.
I mean, looking at this comment here on the Captain and the Super Clams, a Rivers Are Life film. This is a short film that you were a part of.
Documentary, right.
Yeah. The top comment that I'm seeing is, best years of my life was the 70s living in Vero Beach. Spent countless hours on the Indian River. Enjoyed your program and effort to save a piece of heaven. And so, I mean, it's a very tangible impact that, of course you are having, and you're the one leading the charge, right?
Yeah.
But it's something that's newly made possible by drones, right? Because we had talked about this before. Yeah, it was being done by hand previously to a much smaller capacity. As far as I remember, there were boats that were attempted to be used, but they would cause too much disruption, and then helicopters just way too expensive, right?
Yeah, well, nobody's really been able to. They've done the larger clams in hope of them spawning, and one of the problems with that is they have to put cover nets over them to protect them because they're stacked up in a room like this. They're about that deep.
Wow.
And so they put cover nets because everything's trying to eat them. And then the cover nets have to go out every week and take the algae off of them and clean them and fix them. And so there's a lot of
Maintenance or
labor
upkeep,
involved in that, a lot of cost. And also there's the risk because where clams are, stingrays love to be because they eat on clams all the time. So you get somebody get hit by a stingray, that's a bad day.
Yeah.
So with ours, it's more of a hands-off, let's go back to nature approach. And you really can't do it any other way because they've tried putting out by hand. And so they put larvae out by hand, which you don't have any real, you can't really see feedback from that because you're just throwing it in the water and hoping it grows. They've tried it from boats where they just, or even wading and throwing, but the problem is they'll pile up piles because nobody does it, where it just really gets out. And so when they have those piles of clams, that draws predators. And of course, boats is kind of the same problem. Plus, a lot of the areas you can't get into because they're too shallow. and you don't want to disturb the bottom. So with our system, nothing's disturbed. We go above the water. We drop the clams in a very homogeneous manner. It's about 20 per square foot, which is 1 million per acre. And we've actually got underwater video of the clams coming down. When they hit the water, they disperse even more than they are in the air.
Right.
And when they settle, after about 2 or 3 minutes, they bury in the sand.
Yeah.
So they're not in a predator's way for very long.
Right.
And the little predation they did see, there was a place where there was a little clump of clams, maybe 10 or 20, and that attracted a crab. But they didn't see any rush of predator fish or crabs coming in there. They're like, oh, it's time to go.
It's not like throwing bait into a little pond or whatever.
Chumming up a bunch of fish.
Yeah.
So, and that's a lot of people. You talk about people saying you're ignorant.
No, people say that about me. Inconceivable.
Well, somebody that didn't know what they were talking about. But I'll be out doing our deal, and this guy will come up. Happened to me 2 weeks ago. So y'all feeding the fish? Why don't you go learn the life cycle of a clam and really understand, so you can understand what we're doing and know we're not feeding fish.
Are you from this area in Florida?
No, I'm actually from Tuscaloosa, Alabama. I moved to Florida in 2000 to Jacksonville. I was doing wetland mitigation.
Okay.
So I've been in restoration of estuaries and wetlands and stuff since 2000.
You don't know Warren Zwanka. You ever heard that name?
Never
He was a
heard.
diver friend of mine. He's in that industry in Florida. He retired to Florida. He's a professional diver for a while.
So you brought up an interesting point about conservation efforts, right? Or just ecological, like there's, kind of like the very heavy-handed approach that sounds like good in theory. Like, hey, we are so sophisticated, we can just go in and through like genetic engineering or, removing certain species from the environment or whatever the case may be can have adverse effects. And this just reminded me of a similar sort of problem with hippos actually in South America or Colombia, because Pablo Escobar famously had, his own zoo with hippos, and they ended up getting out after, a couple of decades of the state not really being properly maintained. And so they get out, and now there's hundreds of hippos breeding within Colombia. And it's not like something...
Thanks, Pablo.
But
killed a bunch of people and got us hooked on drugs and also introduced hippopotamus to Colombia.
So, back in 2009, an adult hippo was killed by hunters under authorization of local authorities. And then, it became a public story. Oh, my God, they killed this hippo. What did the hippo do, it's like, what do you do to manage that problem? Short of just going out and, killing a bunch of hippos. I think they even tried castrating them. But that costs $50,000 per hippo, right? So that's not practical. So you can come up with all these good ideas for how you can take care of the problem. But, sometimes it literally takes a new technology platform like what you're using. Again, that was something that didn't even really exist, right? And still doesn't even really exist, right? You took a crop spraying drone and modified it to do this mission specifically, right?
Correct.
So let's go back to how we originally met. I actually was calling this plastics company out of Bainbridge, Georgia. We were just starting to explore making our own plastics for our drones. We were 3D printing ourselves for prototyping, but wanted a more commercial grade sort of plastic. And so I give this guy at a plastics facility a call just, out of the blue and tell him a little bit about what we're doing. And he was like, oh, I actually just got done in the last couple of weeks talking with a guy about drones. And again, this is 6 years ago. And I mean, there's still not a lot of people really into drones and using them for any real purpose other than taking photos and videos. So I was like, all right, I need to figure out what this other guy is doing with drones. And so this guy Peter said he would connect us, and within the next couple weeks, and about a couple weeks go by, I hadn't heard anything back, and then all of a sudden I get a call from Ernest. We pretty much instantly hit it off, start a series of meetings to figure out how we could best start working together. I think at that time you had already purchased that Helio drone, but leading up to that, can you talk about obviously you were in ecological or environmental work, as you just talked about. What was kind of like the impetus or like the trail from like, hey, this is work I'm doing, this is new technology, where can I find a drone that can do this? And like kind of what led you down that path to getting into drones, and how you ended up finding Helio? And
well, so my background, I've got a petroleum engineering undergraduate degree, so I've got an engineering type of a mind. And as I got into wetland restoration, I started thinking at first, and I'm also a pilot. I've been flying for 30 years, so I've extensive experience in aviation. And I kept thinking there's got to be a way we can use a drone to help make some of this easier. And the first thing I thought was, well, when I do a mitigation bank, it's anywhere between 1,500 and 7,000 acres that we'll go and restore. And when they come to monitor it to see if you're successful, they'll look at a half-acre piece, maybe 10 of them. And they'll say, okay, these half-acre pieces are doing this, so the whole 7,000 acres is doing this. And I'm like, no, that isn't right. Yeah. And so I at first started thinking about how I could use a drone to look at wetlands and measure their success in tree growth and canopy growth and different varieties of trees. And as I went down that path, I realized, number one, the cameras were pretty expensive. And number two, I didn't have the background. So, ArcGIS is what we would have had to go and do some mapping, work with ArcGIS, do truthing on the ground.
For Jim and all the other uninformed people, ArcGIS is like the go-to software platform for surveyors and like GIS departments or mapping departments within governments.
And they'll use different colors to try and differentiate different species of trees and stuff. And so I realized that was probably not going to work out. Number one, it just didn't interest me that much, and I would have had to have gotten all these agencies to agree that yes, we can do this to make it even commercially viable, which was a long shot. And I just happened to have worked, I actually bought into a company called Seagrass Recovery while I was doing my wetland stuff. I met the guy, Jim Anderson, that owned it. We got to be friends, and he was over around Tampa, and so he needed kind of a business partner, so we invested with him, and I worked with him trying to help him get his business going, but at the time, there wasn't any money. I mean, it was all through the agencies, and they were doing their stuff, and so I ended up getting out of that, and but it never left me because I really enjoyed that work. And so when I was, I thought, well, if we're doing all this by hand, let's figure out how we can do it with a drone. So that's when I started down the.
And this would have been like what, 2018,
God,
2017, something like that?
A long time ago. Yeah, it took me probably 2 or 3 years before I finally got a mechanism that would
all the pieces
actually work.
Together. Yeah.
And before we even built anything or bought anything. So I ended up, looking at clams, and I thought they're little bitty things. I didn't know anything about clams. So I designed all this, and I heard about the Florida super clam. Jacob helped me get the drone brain working with our equipment so that it would.
Basically the electronics and software.
Yeah, so now when the drone goes out on a mission, we set the mission up, and it gets a flight pattern based on the swath of the spray.
Oh.
So our swath is about 3 meters. people like me to say meters. It sounds more scientific. 10 feet.
And communist, but yeah.
10 feet.
Yeah.
But so when I set up a flight, say I'm flying my computer, I'll give it the polygon, tell the swath, it will design the path to go. To
Kind of like
sure,
swim lanes up and down.
Make sure we have a consistent coverage. Where, it was originally designed to do that, but spray poison
Right.
over a field. So we just modified it a little bit. I mean, we say modified a little bit. It took a lot of work.
Yeah. A lot of work, trial, error.
A lot of trial and error. And so once I got everything kind of pulled together, I thought, well, now I need to find a customer. So I had heard about the Super Clam, and Mike Sullivan, who was in that, he's kind of a gruff guy. He's got a restaurant. So I asked my buddy, who's a boat captain, I said, hey, you know Mike Sullivan? He said, yeah, I know him. I said, okay, I need to meet him. He said, yes, just tell him I told you to go by and say hello. So I go up to he's sitting in a bar with his buddy. And I say, hey, Mike? Yeah. Hey, I'm Ernest Hale. Uh-huh. David Lefford said I should come down here and talk to you. I don't know David Lefford. Who's he? So the conversation was a little short. I kind of told him what I was doing. He wasn't interested. Come back a week later. Same thing. A week later. He's starting to listen a little bit now. And so he puts me in touch with Todd Osborne, the professor at University of Florida Whitney Labs. Their office is in Marineland in Florida, over on the East Coast. And Todd immediately, he's the clam guru of Florida. He's the guy that is the clam guy. And he immediately saw the benefit of what we were doing. And so with his blessing, Mike got on board. And then we're working with there's a there's a fishing personality. He has a TV show and he's a guide. His name is Blair Wiggins. And he's big involved with the restoration. So he got into it, and they're all like, well, this is perfect, because now we can just spread clams everywhere, and we don't have to worry about putting these big, they still do the adult clams, because the CCA, conservation group, they are a big proponent of ours as well, Coastal Conservation Association. And so they like what we're doing, but they also want to do putting the adult clams out, because they can get volunteers to come. And it gets people, actively helping.
More tangible, because again, like people may not realize, even though Ernest has talked about it, like these clam and oyster seeds, like the larvae, are essentially like grains of sand. So I mean, it doesn't even look like life, So it's like, oh, what am I really doing? Versus, oh, it's a lot more tangible when you're seeing the clams and oysters at full size.
And actually, the seed do look like little bitty baby clams. I mean, excuse me. But if you have a handful of them, there'll be 300 in your hand. So as they got on board, then we started doing projects, I guess, 2.5 years ago, test projects. And they showed success, and as we got more success, more people got on board. And so now it's kind of it's a thing.
If what you're doing, it's the Red River, it's called Red
Indian River.
Indian River.
Close enough.
in that area, in the area where you've done the most work, if it works, how long before you would see results that you could tangibly measure or get a feel for, this is really working?
So that next stage of our life is from a juvenile to an adult, and it's about 12 months, 9 to 12 months. And when they become adults, that's when they can spawn. So that when they hit the adult, that's when they're going to start they're doing good as they are, but when they get to reproduction, that's when we can get to where we can maybe one day self-sustain on the clam population. So
is one way of measuring this if there's fewer cases of red algae, or
No, they actually go out. So every drop we do, we've got an electronic record with a geographically referenced map of where we put the stuff. So they actually go out to where we put the clams out, and they'll do transects and see how many clams are in each transect, and then.
Is this like the transgender mice? No.
No, but you know what? I will tell you this: clams
They're both
transsexual.
Yeah.
Until
Really?
they're a year old.
Trainee clams, all right.
They're training clams. They figure out if they want to be a man or a woman, and then once they decide, there's no going back. But
Wow.
they've got the freedom of choice until that point.
and they're not persecuted or put down by saying, I want to be this, I want to be that.
I was about to say, so what? We really just have a lot of people, the kind of like the furry deal, just identifying as clams, you know?
Maybe we should get a clam on the podcast and ask it,
Yeah.
how it came to that decision. Wow, okay.
So that's an interesting fact. But
Yeah.
but one of the things that we're doing that hasn't been able to be done before is, since we know what we put out in each location, we can go back and look at different parameters, like what's the water quality here, what's the salinity, what's the temperature on average, and then we can, since we know those clams are there, we can say, okay, they're going to survive better in something that's more like this than like that, which they can't do right now, because now when the clams spawn, they have no way of knowing where those, when they do become juveniles, where they're dropping. I mean, they may run into one every now and then, but they don't know specifically that if it came from
That
the
deployment.
clams where they had put the big group of clams out to spawn, where we know when we see it.
Yeah.
And so,
Well, I mean, are you going to see, if this works and your efforts, pay out 100%, let's say, are you going to see more fish, habitats? Will the water get clearer? Will there be, I'm curious as to what would be all the above. It just makes the waterway a better waterway.
yeah, so clams are the base. They're kind of the front line. And as they start to clean the water up and the water gets clearer, the seagrasses come back. And when the seagrasses come back, that's more habitat for fisheries and stuff. And so it's a cycle. I mean, if you don't have clams, you don't have anything. If you have clams, you're going to have seagrass. And that's there's a big push to restore seagrass, which we've done one seagrass deployment so far. But that's, just another layer of the restoration process. And it's sexier than clams, and people talk about it a lot, but it's also a lot more expensive.
Yeah, one of the things that this reminds me of for all the younger generation people that may be listening is there's this game that was like the ultimate like hype video game that was coming out in like 2015 or something like that, called No Man's Sky. And it's basically this video game where it's a literal endless universe. You can go from planet to planet, solar system to solar system, and it's all just consistently procedurally generated. And if you get to a planet, discover a new species or discover the new planet or whatever, you get to name it, and then everyone else, that plays that game goes to that planet or sees that animal or plant or whatever, sees whatever you named it. But if you start going in and like destroying the environment on a lot of these planets, they have these like drones that come in and they're like basically a guardian of the planet, so to speak. And I see that's kind of what we're working to, but not just within conservation, right? That like drones are really a way for us to become more connected with the world, right? Whether it's counting, populations of animals, or it's literally giving us an eye on maybe poachers that shouldn't be where they are, right? And that's where I immediately, once I heard about what you're looking to do, wanted to see, what we could do to help support you, because most people right now, they see drones as like flying cameras. They take photos and videos, right?
Yeah.
And then there's like these custom off use cases where, again, there's no like drone that you can just go buy off the shelf and do what you're doing, right? It took a lot of custom R&D and, like we talked about, trial and error to get to where you're at today doing it. And like you're saying, it's a thing. I mean, maybe not super large scale all around the world, but you have proven it out. I mean, it's covered across the news, and I think you've been doing this predominantly in Florida, but also in Alabama, right? Or you?
Well, we were trying to get a project. The Mobile Bay National Estuaries Program was trying to get a project approved for us to do our oyster spawning sanctuary, which is where we take oysters up into tidal creeks and then build a little oyster bed out of them by dropping them. And the biggest problem with an oyster are these oyster drills. They'll come in and they'll drill in to the shell and put some enzyme in there and suck all the meat out of the oyster, and they devastate them.
Wait, oyster, like, and these are like
Like
equipment,
snail.
or are they like animals?
Predators.
They're
Predators?
animals. They're
Predators.
predators.
Okay.
They're like
Got-
a snail.
Got it.
And so when you put these oysters up in the tidal creeks, they don't like being up there because the water comes in, and when it goes out, they'll be stuck. So our theory is that as the water comes in and they spawn, then when the tide goes out, it takes larvae out into the main water body to help restore oysters. But we haven't done one yet, but that's, the other oysters like sandy bottom, a lot of that Mississippi, Louisiana coast, and then even into Mobile Bay a little bit is real muddy, especially Mobile Bay having the Tom Bigby come in and just pouring silt in it. So it's not an excellent clam place, but there are areas where you can do clams. But it's, we were invited to a conference at Disney World a couple of weeks ago called Conference Connect. They are the people that try and keep wildlife corridors all across Florida. So with all this development, the animals can still travel. And they invited us. They heard about us. They invited us, said, hey, we want you to come. We want you to be a part of this. We'll give you a booth. We'll give you your tickets. Everything's covered except for hotel. So we went, and it was phenomenal. And it was all, usually you go to a conference and it's people trying to sell people. This was all people that were just trying to do things to help the environment. So there really wasn't any selling there. It was just seeing what people were doing. And fortunately enough, ours was one of the hits of the show. And we actually had Disney come up to us, which they have a very large restoration and conservation department. And so they asked us to come present to their department, which is a very, very big deal.
Yeah, that's awesome.
But,
Getting recognized by Disney, and getting asked to come speak to them internally. That's
I told, and all their big guys were there, and they all came over and saw the videos, and so I called Todd, my professor. Say, Todd, I said, Disney just told me they want us to come see them.
We're going to Disney one night.
He's like, are you kidding me? He said, you don't go see Disney unless they invite you to come see them. They said, it's not, hey, we want to show you this.
A line of people knocking on their door wanting
Right.
to get in to see them, pitch them something, I'm sure.
Yes.
He
If we
said-
want to talk to you, we'll find you.
Yeah, he said he'd been trying to get in for 10 years.
Wow.
Yeah,
So,
I can
so
believe
that
it.
could really, getting somebody like Disney behind us, if it happens,
Yep.
could really expand this
Right.
tremendously. Because,
So sorry to interrupt you. You have one drone that you're using right now. Are you going to be expanding it or adding more drones to the fleet?
hopefully, but right now, the way I have it set up is the drone. So we have 3 different implements. One is for clams, one is for seagrass, spartina, and mangroves altogether, and one is for oyster sanctuaries. So the way it's set up is we take the drone off. The drone doesn't have the legs anymore. The legs are now on the apparatuses. So we set the drone on whichever apparatus we're going to use and connect it, and then it'll fly the thing. So we can do all 3
With one drone.
with one drone.
But yeah, it's essentially making that crop spraying drone a modular
Right,
drone,
yeah.
kind of like a much larger version of what
yeah.
we have with Develop Air.
The length of time the drone before it needs to be refueled, or you have to.
Yeah, that's the biggest problem. You can stay up 15 minutes max.
Wow,
So,
okay.
That's with like all like the payload and
Yeah, that's what
that's
the payload.
delivering the payload.
Yeah.
And with the
just
your-
shy of an hour without.
you showing the plot, the drone flies itself and is releasing its payload on its own, right? You don't have an operator telling it what to do.
No, it would never work if you tried to do it by hand.
And no, again, you can in like emergency situations
Yeah.
take over manually, or even if you're just wanting to do like basic test or whatever, you can fly it manually with a controller, and it's a lot less forgiving, learning with a drone like that versus something like
Yeah.
Develop Air.
Usually when I'm flying it by hand, I'm more nervous than I am happy. So,
Yes.
because something's gone wrong and there's
And
something
if
I've
it
got to
crashes in
fix.
the water, you might have to,
Yeah, I mean,
have to retrieve it or let it go and get a new one.
If those electrons got in the salt water, it'd be a game over.
yeah.
Yeah.
So
And
there's
I
others.
don't want to pry, but just
How much does it
very
cost?
expensive, not very expensive, higher than.
So if we were going to replace that drone today, because I bought that drone
Yeah.
5 years ago, I guess, $60,000, and then our attachments are probably another 20.
For each one?
Yeah,
Gosh.
Yeah.
Wow. Ooh.
Yeah.
so
And-
that's expensive.
So I can see why you would be nervous if you're
Yeah.
flying it.
Yeah, this thing is literally like, and calling it mini is a misnomer, but it's like a mini helicopter, and it's even bigger than some of like those little 1 or 2 seater helicopters. I mean, maybe that, again, that's a little bit of a, but not far off. I mean, this is an aircraft. It's
So
a
how
true
big is this-
vehicle.
is this
It's
drone?
spread out. It reaches further than this table.
Yeah, it's 10 feet prop tip to prop tip.
Wow. So
And
that's,
it's 8 motors.
That's prop tip on one side from the other with,
Yeah.
with the props like this.
Extended out. Yeah. Yeah.
10 feet. Wow. Okay.
So it's big.
And what's the maximum weight it'll carry?
So it's 145 pounds.
Wow, I could carry a
and
person.
Sustained.
Sustained.
So, like, it could very briefly get me off the ground. That's not saying all that much, but yeah, I always made the joke when it was in our office or going out to the field where you either put the fluid tanks if you're spraying water or the 2 little reservoirs or whatever for dumping like the seed into, like the clam and oyster seed. It kind of looks like the little spots in a baby swing, you know, to put your legs through. And so I always talked about making it like my little passenger drone while it was with us. Never did that, but yeah.
Yeah, I asked the Helio guys. When I first did this, they were a smaller company, so I was talking to the owners, and now they've gotten pretty big. I still talk to the owners. But I asked him, I said, what happens if I overload it? I know you got a safety factor. He said, well, they'll be fine until you get to it, and then it crashes. So there's not like wobbling, oh, let's land. It's like,
It just
boom.
Yeah. It's like cannot sustain enough lift.
Now,
Yeah.
so battery power is our biggest hindrance right now. With the battery power we have and with our spread rate, we can do an acre in 15 minutes. So we can do 1 million clams every 15 minutes. Now, if it's real windy, probably cut that in half. And a lot of times it'd be a 20 knot wind, and when it does,
You don't fly. You don't want to fly when it's windy.
well, I do, but it's only about 7 or 8 minutes, and it's coming back.
Yeah. So, and you need 2 of these batteries. Each of these batteries weighs 10 to 11 pounds. So, I mean, again, our drones are like 4 pounds with the battery and everything. So, I mean, it's quite an operation to run this, right? You know, for if you're doing a couple of acres, right, you may need 8 batteries, you know, if it's a windy day, right? And it's not like, oh, let me just like fill up my little backpack with batteries and have my drone case. I mean, you saw what Ernest showed up. It's not even just the cost of the drone, right? How are you getting that drone from site to site, right? You need something like a Sprinter van to get it around. So
Is it in there now?
No, it's back in Florida.
Yeah.
And in that Sprinter van, I've got a 5,000 watt inverter.
charge batteries.
To charge batteries, each charger is a 3,000 watts. So I can run one battery charger at a time, and you can plug up a pair of batteries on the charger. So
Yeah, these battery chargers, if you like, depending on like the circuit, if you have 2 of them on the same circuit, you can very easily trip the circuit.
yeah,
So like when they're in our office, we'll take like one battery charger, plug it in on one side of the office on one circuit or like one panel, and then we'll bring another battery charger over like Brian's media side and charge other batteries over there if need be. So
and we also have
quite
one.
the system.
There's a group in New York State. I talked to them a long time ago about possibly building what we have out of carbon fiber, and just I didn't have my concept really going. It was all thoughts, and so it didn't really go very far. But I called them. They're called Dragon Plate, and they manufacture carbon fiber. And so I called them about 3 weeks ago. Again, I said, hey, we talked a while back. I got something that's running now. It works. I want to look at making it out of carbon fiber instead of aluminum because, there's some if it's not aluminum. So it's pretty heavy mop. And so anyway, they said, okay, and took it. And they said, we got a meeting on Monday morning, so I'll present it at the meeting. I'll send the engineer. He came back and said, hey, the owner of the company wants to get involved in this. He said, this looks like a really good project. And he said, so they're helping us with design, and they're helping us with some of the cost of doing a carbon fiber model of what we're doing right now. So
That's awesome.
I just had our 3D printer guy do all the CAD drawings for us. So once we get that done, that'll cut that weight, I think right now is about 25 pounds.
I was about to say at least like 10, 15 pounds of probably
Yeah,
cut.
so I imagine it'll go down to 10 pounds.
Yeah.
So you'll carry more payload, right?
Yep.
You'll be able
Yeah,
to carry
so-
more
Or
clams.
more flight time. Yeah.
Or more
It's the
flight.
trade-off, whatever trade-off
Yeah.
you're looking to make. Yep.
Well, making
So-
it lighter's got to be a win-win all the way
Yeah.
around.
Oh, yeah.
Carry
So
more, and you can stay up and fly longer.
Yep.
So, and we're actually going to extend right now the tops of the columns come to the top of the drone. I'm going to extend it up probably 6 inches so we can add more payload if we need to. But,
More clams.
yeah.
Another million.
Yeah. This isn't one of those Ukrainian or Russian drones.
Yeah.
Different type of payload.
Yeah.
We're dropping clams.
Yeah. Clams. Yeah.
You can't even see them. They're so small. It's pretty interesting. It's an interesting thing.
Yeah. What I wanted to, unless you had a thought you wanted to bridge that to.
I have a quick thought.
Yeah,
I want to
go-
break
yeah.
away from this because you made
Yeah.
me think about something. Don't you think that if they're not already, law enforcement is going to be using drones to go up and use radar to write tickets?
Yeah, I've
And
seen
may-
that. I've
maybe
seen
even
that already.
As the car goes by, they would take a snapshot of the light, just like a speed camera works here.
Yeah,
You get in the mail. What's this from the highway department? You open it up and it's a fine for $150 or something. And there's
That's
a picture
happening.
of your car, speed going through a red light or something.
That's already happening. And actually, funnily enough that you mentioned that, my brother, because again, I'm the drone guy for everyone in, my circle, right? So anytime someone sees someone with drones, gotta let me know, or they have an idea with drones, gotta let me know. And he was like, what if you could do like the speed detection, via drone? I was like, that is actually being done before. And I was like, that's also done, and he wasn't familiar with this. In some states, actually, aircraft like Cessna 172, 182 is what I've seen actually being used for monitoring traffic and doing speed detection. But I wanted to go quite a bit further back. So, we talked about you getting into the environmental, ecological work, but this wasn't something that you had in mind from, being a little young lad, right? That like
No.
you could have never seen, you're in custom drone development, custom drone applications, doing this sort of environmental work with them. So what were your thoughts? Was that something that you always had like a path in mind that you wanted to take? Like, I know a little bit about some of your interest outside of this work, like Alabama, right? So were you ever like down the football like sports path, or like what was like your earliest sort of memory like of like this is what I want to do in life, and like how did it start changing or evolving? Or
Well, originally, so my grandfather grew up on a dirt farm, and he was the first person to go to college out of his family, and worked as a county agent. And then he actually helped start Alpha Insurance, which at that time was for the farmers, and he became the executive director of the Alabama Timber Association. So he was more of a lobbyist, but he brought himself up, and he always had a farm. The last one he had is the one we have now that you've been to.
beautiful farm. Yeah.
And I remember when so I grew up working on the farm with him, doing cows. He had cows, he did row crops, he did everything. And so I went up to him in high school and said, Granddad, I want to come run the farm when I get out of school. He said, don't you do it. He said, farming ain't no way to make a living. He said, you get a job where you can pay your bills, and you do this for fun, because there are too many things, the market, the weather, everything.
Risky.
And even as frugal as he was, he kept everything held together by baling wire. And it was, if somebody, one we had this neighbor that was my age, went to Auburn. His family had a farm that they'd had in their family since 1800.
Wow.
He decided he wanted to go start doing this real rare breed of cows. He bought new equipment, put up fences. My grandfather was like, don't do it, don't do it, don't do it.
Warned him against it.
And he ended up losing the place. So, so when he told me that, I thought, okay, I better find another direction. And engineering math and science had always been kind of my deal. And I did play a lot of sports, but I was never good enough to think I was going to play anywhere else besides high school. And so I went and got a petroleum engineering degree and went out to West Texas. You know that show Landman?
No, I don't think so.
It's
No.
on Paramount.
Yeah, one of those. I haven't
Billy
watched
Bob.
it, but Taylor Sheridan
Yeah.
is part of
Yeah.
that universe, like the Yellowstone and yeah.
That was me.
Okay.
That's where I was drilling wells. And so I was working out of Dallas, but our wells were all in Midland.
Now, what time frame are we talking here?
This is 1982. And so oil business was booming. I was working for a small company. I was the only engineer, so I was out doing everything, drilling, completing, putting it in production. But I'd have to go to Midland, Texas during the week, come back on the weekends. In Midland, Texas, if you grew up in the South, that's like going into, I don't know what you'd call it. There are no trees.
It's just flat.
The
nothing.
wind blows all the time. There are tumbleweeds on your front door.
Oh.
And the water tastes terrible. So I called my dad and said, Dad, mark my words, I will never live in Midland, Texas. Well, 5 years later, because the oil prices started going down, I was in Midland, Texas. I went from Dallas to Austin to Midland. And there was still layoffs all the time. And so I thought, I'm just going to do my own deal. If somebody's going to lay me off, it's going to be me. So I started working for some independent oil companies, and we were doing okay. And I had like 5 rigs set up to drill, and in 1 week, this is when oil got down to $9 a barrel, I think it was.
That's insane. Yeah.
They called me up, every one of them, and said, okay, we're done. We're pulling everything back. We're not going to drill for a while. So I called U-Haul. I was like, I'd always wanted to go back and get a master's in finance. I was always really intrigued with finance. And so I thought, well, good time for me to go back to Alabama and get a master's in finance. So I called U-Haul. It was 3 weeks to get a U-Haul to leave Midland, Texas, because so many people were leaving. But so, that kind of ended my petroleum engineering situation. I got back, got a master's in finance, started doing some real estate, and got into what I thought was going to be a really good niche. I went into low-income housing with historic rehabs. So I would go into towns and we'd buy 15 or 20 houses that were in neighborhoods that used to be middle class, back at the turn of the century. Everybody left. They had been in bad disrepair. We'd buy them, and then we would restore them historically. So we get historic tax credits that we'd sell to investors, and we'd get the low-income tax credits, so that low-income tenants were in a house now in a neighborhood instead of an apartment complex. It didn't really work out like I thought it would. And so I was looking around for something to do because I was really getting disappointed in that. And my sister's father-in-law, who I'd known all my life, we were at a cocktail party. He said, he was a civil engineer. He said, have you ever heard of wetland mitigation banking? I said, no. He said, you may want to look into it. I think it might be pretty big. And so this was probably late 1990s. So I started looking into it. And I thought, okay, let's go try this. And tried a few things around Alabama, which the demand wasn't there. Plus, it was easy to get a mitigation bank permit. So Florida and California were the 2 toughest places to do that permitting. I didn't want to go to California, so I went to Florida and went all up and down the state. I was flying then. Took my plane. Every week I'd fly. Started in South Florida and worked my way up, looking at markets and mitigation banks, what was there, and ended up in Jacksonville. And we ended up putting together 14,000 acres of mitigation banks in Jacksonville. So it was a really good situation for us. And we did a lot of restoration. Out of the 14, when I did it, nobody else was doing it really. There was one other bank up there that really hadn't been officially approved. And out of that 14,000 acres that we did, there's probably been another 20,000 in that area that were done because people started seeing our success, and they did others. So it did a lot for restoration of the wetlands and the wetland systems, which are very critical. And it just kind of showed that compounding once things start going.
You ever worked in South Carolina?
No.
On the coastal waterway, or?
Never have worked up there.
I'm from South Carolina.
Oh, are you?
Yeah, well, I just know that with the environmental rules, and you can't do anything. You got to really watch the marshlands and wetlands that are highly protected.
Yeah, I tried connecting Ernest to some people up in the South Carolina government involved in like their agriculture programs, and they'll do some funding initiatives for people building agricultural based tech businesses. I don't think they necessarily have to be tech, but some new form of agriculture. And again, unfortunately, I don't think it's worked out or anything.
Nothing ever went with it. But we hope to go up the coast. This can be done all the way up the East Coast. It can be done across Texas. It can be done out on the West Coast. So
Are you going to move all over the country?
I hope so.
I mean, your goal, you got to be on the water, so you're wherever there's a coast, right?
Yeah,
and they're having these problems.
Wherever there's an estuary, so I don't work on the shore on the ocean side.
Okay.
I work back in the estuaries and the intercoastal and those areas.
Mississippi in the rivers like that as well.
Mississippi's a little muddy, so not so much Mississippi, Louisiana, but that Texas coast, it'd probably be something that would work there. Most people are really interested in oysters. Oysters are a little sexier than a clam.
Yeah.
But believe it or not, so everybody sees oysters, they're so good. They filter, I think, 30 to 50 gallons a day. A clam will do 10 to 20. But an oyster on the east coast of Florida, and it may be a little different in the Texas coastal areas, their lifespan's 5 years. And so they've got 5 years of 30 gallons, 50 gallons a day. Well, the average lifespan of a clam is 20. So they got 20 years of 20 gallons a day. So over the life of a clam, there's more filtration than there is with the life of an oyster.
And it's filtering that water. It's filled. That's what you're saying it does. 20 gallons.
Yeah, 10 to 20 gallons.
It's removing
nitrogen and phosphorus, and taking particulates out of the water turbidity.
Taking little fish poops or whatever. Yeah.
All the clams I've seen, they land and then they make themselves upright like this, and then they just bury themselves, and they're in the sand. So water.
So they're in the sand. They have a little nozzle.
Okay.
That sticks up, and it sucks the water in, and they filter through there.
Wow, 20 gallons. Wow,
10 to 20 gallons.
And I'm showing my ignorance here of aquatic life. So there's oysters, clams, and then mussels are something completely different, right? And which one of those, if any of them, are the ones that create the pearls? And what I learned somewhat recently.
Oysters do the pearls.
Okay.
Yeah.
Hence why they're sexier.
Yeah.
Another reason why.
And
do you know what those pearls are? Because I just recently heard how pearls are come to be formed, and it's some material, and it might even be some sort of excrement or something like that that's just solidified. And
yeah, I'm not an expert, but I do know that usually it starts by there'll be a grain of sand inside the oyster.
Yeah,
and they'll start coating it.
It coats it with mother of pearl, right?
Okay.
Yeah, you look on the inside of an oyster shell, it's pearl, has a pearl look to it. So but again, I'm not an expert, so anybody out there saying, hey,
fact check.
Yeah. You don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
You're ignorant.
Yeah. So I thought this would be fitting, and it could segue into some conversation outside of conservation into politics, however much, if any, we want to get into that. But over the last few weeks, I saw a interview between Carl Sagan and one of the most famous conservationists, depending on how you actually look at him, Ted Turner. And I thought that was a very interesting kind of meeting of the minds. And one of the problems that they discussed in this conversation was, who is our enemy? Why do we need to have nukes, especially at the scale that we have them? And this was back from 1989, right? And so it's just how prevalent that conversation still is here today in 2025. And I know we had some disagreements with the whole Iran situation. Luckily, I think, at least knock on wood for the time being, I think it was the right call, if you can say that. But my fear was that strike was going to put American boots on the ground, which I think as a country, the last thing that we need.
I agree with you 100%.
Yeah, I don't want to see that either. But yeah, nuke weaponry will remain relevant, and as time goes on, nuclear weaponry will always be relevant, right?
Well, my daughter lives in New York City, and I was talking to her yesterday. I said, "What are you doing on the 4th?" She said, "Well, I don't really know yet." I said, "Stay away from crowded areas."
Yeah.
So just be careful.
Yeah.
Because,
Absolutely.
I hate to sound somewhat like that more and more, but it really is like there's a lot of people just, whether it's because they're not getting their way, that might not be the way of framing it, but they just have such vitriol and hatred, for other Americans, right? And it's like, we may disagree, even at this table, from policy to policy, person to person, what we think about them, but we can all still get together and have a conversation like this. And I just think that more and more so, you hear someone say something online, and then you're like, that's that person, I'm going to keep them in that box, even if it's not with the context of, what was said before or after, I hear that so often, even like neighbors. My dad has kind of had these same sort of like quick reactions of people like Joe Rogan, like, oh my God, that guy's retarded. And it's like,
Did you see his interview with Bernie Sanders?
I did. I watched all of that.
I just saw a little.
I don't think Bernie Sanders represented himself well there, but I think he represented himself well. But I don't think. I think a lot of people watching that like the idea of Bernie Sanders
weren't as enamored.
Yeah, by the end of it. Yeah,
and let's face it, it's easier to stand up and do a speech and than to have
especially unopposed,
than to have a conversation with an opposing viewpoint.
Right.
Yeah, I was a little disappointed too. I was hoping that he'd say something would kind of resonate. Not that I'm a Bernie bro, but I like people having a different opinions. But he seemed to fall into that same. Well, all these people giving money, and then Joe Rogan's like, "Well, what about the 1.2 billion?" Oh well, and then stop that conversation. Instead of talking about it.
Yeah, and he will create these representations of problems that there might be 2/5 accuracy there, right? Like he'll touch on this overarching problem of education, and then then it's like, okay, we can realize that there's a problem in education, but then he talks about it being a funding problem, and it's like, if you go into all the areas where it's been a lack of funding, and then they get the funding that they apply for via grants or through some sort of federal assistance, I don't think that's ever been a solution to a problem of an urban area not having a good education, right? And so it's kind of like, hey, we can recognize this problem, but I'm going to kind of, whether or not he's doing it purposely or not is hard to say, but kind of skewing it to misrepresent the problem. And then the moment he's asked for a solution, he's like, it's like, have you not been talking about this for literally decades on end, and you still don't have a solution in mind for this kind of perverse problem that you're taking a real problem, but then again kind of perverting it and kind of burying your head into the sand of what the real problem is. And again, not that it's an easy solution, but I mean, I think it all goes back to education as far as teaching your kid how to read and write by the time they go into school. And I think more often than not nowadays, that's becoming the it's becoming rare, right? That it's like now, like, oh, we have this great public education system. They're going to take care of my child, right? And I think that goes way beyond education, right? That it's in the form of safety, right? You know, we have like all these regulatory agencies in the name of safety. We have all these procedures and factories in the name of safety. But at the end of the day, if you're not the independent operator caring about your own safety, your own, like, all of these are essentially security theater to make it so you could turn your brain off and like, hey, this is a super safe job because all these people and procedures are in place to make it so. And that's how complacency happens. That's how, and so what I'm trying to get at is like, hey, this government is going to solve our problem, you know, whether it's education or whatever. And I think that was more of like the perspective Bernie was taking, which again, that's what he's been known for. Yeah. But he wasn't able to kind of give a good argument for it in the way that I will give Obama credit. Obama is great at making bad ideas sound great to a lot of people, right? Bernie does not have that skill set. Yeah. And I think it showed. But
well, I've seen that recently with some young parents. They're like, hey, they go to school. That's the school's job is to teach them. Where when my kids are growing up, half my nights on the weeknights was making sure they were doing the homework, right, and making sure it was done before they went to bed. I didn't like it, but that's what I had to do with the teenagers. I mean, you got to. But I think now we're like, hey, y'all are taking care of that. I don't have to deal with it. Which is bad.
And again, it's like the kicking can down the road, not accepting responsibility. Oh, I wasn't good at math, and so my little Johnny isn't good at math. Like, they just didn't get the math gene. Yeah. That's like, there's no fucking math gene. Like, you know, it's because you're not spending the time with your kid, you know, to actually make sure that they understand. And I'm not saying they have to be a mathematician, but again, just basic addition, subtraction, multiplication, division. Again, obviously we have calculators pretty much everywhere we go, but that all just goes into thinking for yourself, whether it's quickly on the spot doing some basic math or like really trying to think through some sort of problem or some sort of conversation and having to come up with an answer on the spot. And that's been lost on a lot of people. Yeah.
Well, you know, with Doge, which I'm 100% for, but it's got its downfalls too. It stopped almost all of the money that was going into aquacultural restoration. It stopped it. I hope that's not in perpetuity, right? Just so they can make sure everybody's where they are. But there's this group, they're called One Water. It's a company, and they own a number of different marine-related assets. And there's a big show in Orlando in July called ICAST. It's the largest saltwater fishing show in the world, I think. And they've got a huge booth, and they're going to put our drone up. We're part of their conservation. They're doing seagrasses and clams, so we're part of their program. And they're going to put our drone up above their booth with spinning, looking like clams are coming out of it. And their focus, or one of their focuses, is to try and bring all the people that are invested in the marine industry together to fund restoration, because if you don't have waterways, you don't have business.
Yeah.
And so it's called, I forgot what it's called, but it's really a great thought, because you can't count on the federal government or state government to give you money. And most of the time, it's going to their buddies anyway. Right. I see that all the time. So, you know, somebody like me coming in trying to get some money is almost impossible.
Right.
And so I was hoping that they might do something like with what they do with wetlands. Because with wetlands, you restore a unit of function, which is supposed to be equal to 1 acre of a fully functioning wetland. How they come up with that, who knows, but they got it. And so I can take that and I can sell it to people that are destroying wetlands. And that's how that works. You know, I build up a mitigation bank with all these environmental credits. And if you go build a shopping center, you need to take out X number of credits.
It's almost like the carbon recapture sort of deal.
Yeah, except for this is real carbon. It's kind of fake, if you ask me. But so, you know, we've looked at, and we tried to put together a program with, I forgot what we call it, not nutrient trading, but biodiversity credits. Where when we put out the clams and the seagrasses, we can use eDNA to see what the fisheries were coming in prior to our putting our stuff out and after. And so you get all these different lifts from all these different angles. It hadn't happened yet. It's going to take the state or the federal government to do it, and I don't think anybody has that in them. I did ask I won't say who it was, but it was somebody in the state of Florida. I was at a conference giving a talk, and the head of this department was up, and I said, "What?" I said, when you go in Florida, if you go in for a development, you pay all these kind of impact fees. Impacts for schools, impacts for roads, impacts for water and sewer. I said, why don't you charge an impact fee for the estuaries? Because when they build, it's going to put more nutrients into the estuaries, et cetera. And I didn't even get an answer because the home builders in Florida are probably the strongest lobbyists
Yeah.
in the whole state.
I was going to ask you if you ever had have you ever gotten cross with a developer or builder that is angry at what you're doing, that you're causing them problems?
No, everybody loves it. Everybody loves it. It's just, we don't do anything to impede development. So the waters aren't protected like nearly as well as the wetlands. In Florida, they fly the state every year, and they compare last year's aerial to this year's aerial. If they see a ditch that wasn't permitted, they're coming to see you.
Wow.
It's serious.
It's a fine. There's a significant. How serious of a fine? It depends on the
Well,
size
it
of the
depends
ditch.
on the size, yeah. So it's, most of the people that do it are people that have a lot and they really don't know.
Yep.
And so they start doing stuff and they come back and say, no, you can't do that. Mm-hmm. And so they'll charge them for the mitigation plus a fine. But it's expensive. They put people in jail before for filling big wetlands.
That's,
So, but if you go build a retaining pond and you dump a bunch of fresh water into the Indian River Lagoon, nobody says anything. I mean, I don't know what can be done to change that.
Are you familiar? I don't think it's his group per se, but Robert Kennedy Jr. was involved with that River Keepers group.
Oh, yeah.
Are you familiar with that? Or
every river has a river keeper, and so they're more of a watchdog than anything else to see what's going on and try and stop.
Like neighborhood watch more so than actual conservation. It's like, hey, we see people doing illegal dumping or illegal fishing or something.
So they're the spokesperson for the river.
Okay. Yeah,
So,
I know we have one like for the Chattahoochee.
Yeah. So they will cause some problems. If somebody's going to build a development or try and put a plan in, they'll fight it some. But.
Yeah, that was really eye-opening to me because, again, like, we obviously need the ability to produce the goods that, especially American consumers want, right? Willing to spend their hard-earned dollars on. But there is that trade-off of, like, recycling, that's all made up by and large, right? Like 99.9% of especially now that, like, for a brief period of time, it was somewhat profitable for China to even take in our shipments of recycled goods and process them. But that was still really subsidized by them. And again, getting us more reliant on China, right? And then as it became unprofitable, right? They're like, we can't afford to keep losing all this money on recycling these Americans' garbage, right? And so going back, I forget, maybe the 40s, and it could have even been earlier, IBM was one of like the first landmark cases of they would make all of their PC boards, right, their computer boards and motherboards, and then dump all the excess boards off into the Hudson River. And that was, I guess, one of the first River Keeper projects, if not like the impetus for starting River Keeper. Yeah. And it's like, well, on one hand, like that stuff has got to go somewhere, and if not a river, it's going to end up in a landfill because, I mean, realistically, you're not going to be able to reuse, every part of that board, right? Yeah. And I mean, we see it at a much smaller scale, even just our 3D printed plastic waste. And it's like, well, is the answer to stop making drones? No, but I mean, it is at least being mindful. How can we produce this in a way that is creating less waste from the start? Because if you're like, hey, we're going to recycle this, that's pretty much, wishful thinking, as a a nice way of putting it.
Yeah, I actually looked into the recycling business. When I got into the mitigation business, I was like, well, what
Not
else
much
can
of a
I do?
business. Yeah.
And I started looking into it. There was a group up in New York that I went up and visited, and they had a plant. And I just saw where there's, like I said, at that time, what they would send to China. But then that stopped not long after that. So yeah, there's nothing. I mean, that's a cost to a garbage collector, as far as I know.
Yeah.
So is this a true statement? Pretty much in this country, recycling it's nothing like it used to be.
Globally.
It caught on, and it was the thing.
It was a fad.
Now
it was
a fad. It came in, and and we saw it for what it was.
And again, it's like virtue signaling in politics.
Yep.
It's, hey, let me sign up for this great marketing term that's going to make me feel like I'm a great, valuable, contributing member of society, right? I'm doing my part to make sure our earth is not getting destroyed.
Yeah, the thing now is green. People put green, so a company will make a product or whatnot, and they'll do a tiny amount of something to promote, recycling or whatever, and then they'll label.
We're into climate tech and sustainability.
Then they'll label their product as green friendly, so to speak. It's kind of like a stamp you have to
Another
have.
bullshit one: renewable energy. I mean, what is really renewable? Like, there's nothing renewable about solar panels taking up environments like hillsides and like literally mountains, like acres upon acres of nothing but solar panels. You're not telling me that's not killing a lot of plant life?
It's an environmental desert.
Yeah.
100%.
And then they go bad in 20, 30
and
years. They got to be replaced.
They're going to go to a landfill, or
Right.
I mean.
And so it's like, really, nuclear, again, that's marketing on the bad way. Like what we're talking about with the Florida homeowners. Who wants to sign up with like the bad, story that was Chernobyl or Fukushima or whatever? Who wants to sign up to live within 100, 150 miles of a nuclear? I wouldn't mind, right?
Yeah.
But then if it's right in your backyard, maybe I would mind a little bit more, right? So it's...
Yeah, but I think, and I'm not an expert on nuclear energy, but I've been reading up and listening to a lot of stuff. It seems like the process now is really safe.
Yep.
Really safe. And they were saying even at 3 Mile Island, nobody died.
Right, and
It's the regulatory
Microsoft is Microsoft. No,
Oh,
I
yeah.
think so. Yeah, Microsoft.
Yeah,
I think they're doing a
put,
data center.
they're going to reactivate
Yeah.
those units that were turned off
Yeah,
to
I think
power.
there's one they can't reactivate, but the other two they are. But yeah, so it's, to me, nuclear is by far the way to go.
My dad was a 38-year career senior guy with Duke Energy, and he was a nuclear guy. He ran a nuclear power plant from the construction phase to bringing it online for like 20 years, and so nuclear's in my family. But yeah, the technology today compared to the 70s when 3 Mile Island and Chernobyl in the 80s, and that plant it wouldn't have met basic safety standards in this country, what the Russians did in the Soviet era. But I think it's Bill Gates has a company called TerraPower, and he's spending a ton of money to develop the SMR, small modular reactor, where they can bring them in on a flatbed truck, this nuclear reactor, small, to power an area that's been hit after a hurricane or something, and supply power to everybody. I think everything's changing with technology.
Yeah. And I really hope that the green energy goes away. Because it's going to be a disaster in 20 years.
Yeah,
when
and
those things start falling apart.
And you get so many, I was going to say misguided kids, but it's beyond kids, misguided people. It's like, we want to do what's right, but it's like, get rid of the coal plants. So what, like China and the rest of the world that's already developed or continuing to develop can just like wave goodbye to us in their rear view mirror? And contrary, like to the other side of that, well, let's just say if we were to stop using coal and, refining oil and like all these fossil fuel sort of bad practices to produce energy, I think have like 4% of the world's population and only 11% of like the energy consumption usage around the, or like the, not the usage, but like the emissions. And so it's like, if we were to replace all of our coal factories, all of our oil refineries with like the most up to date, like what are we going to get that 11% emissions down to 9%? And what are we going to do for the other countries still just developing, going through their first or second industrialization period? Are we going to hold them at gunpoint saying, hey, we can't allow you to industrialize because it's not clean for the environment, right? But oftentimes I feel like that's the position of self-proclaimed like progressive or liberal people that want more for people, more for humanity, yet actively through what they want, pushing other people down at the expense of like being clean. Like, hey, you can't like develop your own industry in your country because unless you're going to do it via nuclear, which, you know, isn't really the case for what, a handful, maybe 2 handfuls of countries where that's an option. And even like in the countries where it is an option, like the US, if you consider it, good luck getting through the regulatory process, which I think has been changing over the last 4 years. I think that's from what I've heard. Trump has been making a big push to a lot of these applications, whether it's utilities or for nuclear energy plants, just basically get decisions done in 2 weeks instead of 20 years, right? And again, that's a lot of the kind of vitriol or like hating. Oh, he's just like not doing due process, and it's like due process. I mean,
well, you know, I was listening to something the other day that that said that our energy production has pretty much been kind of stable, slightly going up.
Yeah.
China's has gone straight up.
Yeah.
Because while we've been focused on green energy instead of nuclear or something else.
Focusing on what we can keep people from doing as opposed to what can we do together as a country.
And then also, you know, abundant, cheap energy is the key to a successful civilization.
Right.
Absolutely.
If you don't have that, then you're not going to get industrialized, or people are going to be.
You can't commute to work. You're going to have to stay at a farm and just take care of your own food, right?
There's a great book written by a Pulitzer Prize winning author, Gwyneth Cravens, I think is her name, and the book is called Nuclear Power or Nuclear Energy Power to Save the World. And this came out about 15 years ago, and this is when it's starting to change. So if you're interested in nuclear power and the vision people have that, you may want to read that book. She is a well-researched and professional writer, and the notes section in that book is 30, 40 pages of notes where she's done her research. So, and she's a New Yorker, you know, liberal New York writer or whatnot, who's coming on to and supporting nuclear energy. I think his public sentiment's changing.
And I might need to rewind or provide a little bit of context once I get going, but this is a part of the conversation between Carl Sagan on the left, Ted Turner on the right, talking about the future we want as America. And again, I think that's a lot of what we're having to decide now, you know, almost 40 years later. Oh, 1 second. I have it muted. It might be really loud.
For people able to take care of themselves. There are countries which are perfectly able to do that. The United States is an extremely rich country. It's perfectly able to do that. It chooses not to. It chooses to have homeless people. We are 19th in the world in infant mortality. 18 other countries save the lives of their babies better than we do. How come? They just spend more money on it. They care about their babies more than we care about ours. I think it's a disgrace. And this country has vast wealth. You just look at what something like Star Wars, the money spent on Star Wars, we've already spent $20 billion on it. If these guys are permitted to go ahead, they will spend $1 trillion on Star Wars. Think of what that money could be used for.
Really quick, you guys probably remember the Star Wars program being introduced. When I first listened to this, I of course had heard of the Ronald Reagan. I was like, why are they talking about how much it costs to produce the Star Wars movies? But yeah.
To educate, to help, to bring people up to a sense of self-confidence, to improve not just the happiness of people in America, but their economic standing, to improve the competitiveness of the United States compared to other countries. We are using money for the wrong stuff.
Carl, do you think time travel is possible?
So I just thought that was interesting. Again, from the perspective of, you know, I don't agree with him where it's a money problem, right? But it really goes back to what do we want as a country, and again, one as individuals. And I think a lot of people have been putting that off for, the last few decades. And again, here we are almost 4 decades later, still in the same spot. What do we want? How are we going to move forward together as a country? And I hate to call out how divided it seems like we are, but it seems like there's and it's not as black and white, just like two differing schools of thought, but it seems very much like we want everything to go through this bureaucratic due process that everyone has to get approval to do anything in life versus let's just go do, and then we'll figure out what we did wrong, and then maybe, reshape, reshape what we did, after we get a few years down the road. And again, maybe not the best way of framing it up, but I think we need to, in my opinion, right, get more people on the idea of let's act together as a country, in America's interest, as opposed to, unlike what we've been doing for the last 4 or 5 decades, trying to bring up the rest of the world, spending our money abroad where, there are, points that I think we should be spending more money on environmental restoration projects. Because again, we can maybe argue that, climate change isn't real, or climate change is, not caused by humans, or how much climate change is caused by humans. But I think everyone can get on board, don't we want there to be more wildlife for us to fish and feed our families and, go enjoy in recreation? Don't we want to have those same rivers not filled with trash and all of this just actual pollution, very tangible sort of pollution, right? And that's something that people can get on board with. And I think a lot of times it's just not the framing that people are getting. And, especially with Donald Trump, I mean, I think no one has been more mischaracterized. I know I've talked to you about this quite a bit, but he could be, the savior of the environment, in a way that Theodore Roosevelt is revered for, bringing the national park structure to, again, not just the United States, really kind of set the precedent for the world as well. But I would like to think I'm wrong, but I think we've almost gotten to a day and age where no matter how good something someone does, if the optics can be portrayed in a way that's not great, people would just rather accept the reality from the optics of it versus what the reality actually is.
Yeah. Well, one good
maybe way to take
one good example of that is, so we go out, we're putting our clams out, and there's been a lot of publicity about it. And so this guy did a kind of a little clip, put it on TikTok, and someone came, hey, y'all just wasting money, you're feeding fish, that's all you're doing. And so I didn't read it, because I don't read that stuff. But my professor buddy did, and he got irate, and the guy was like, you can't fight this. He said, you cannot fight with people online.
Yep.
That they understood that that's a stage of the clam's life, and they're going to bury under and be protected and not just sit there waiting on fish to eat them. Then they would understand the program. But, you're always going to have people that either don't care enough to understand or just
purposely mischaracterize it.
Want to be contrarian.
Jim, what's that?
He's contrarian.
But I really, again, and this is me being contrarian, disagreeing with you. I don't go out of my way to be contrarian, right? I just look at what I think is the best decision to make in the moment with the information I have available to me. And I think a lot of times, when you get in conversations with people, it's I want to be right, I want to prove you wrong, versus can't we just have a conversation? This is the information I have, this is the information you have, and try to find some common ground or some common understanding amongst,
like Larry.
Yeah, Larry and I are perfect. No, I really can get along with just about anyone having a
differing,
even a political conversation, right? But differing viewpoints. But one guy in particular, a neighbor across the street, would just blow up on you for the smallest difference of opinion.
Yeah. Well, you got to be careful these days.
Yeah. It's there's a lot of passion out there. We're
People get
definitely
agitated.
polarized.
Yeah, they get
Country's
agitated.
polarized.
Yeah, you're not going to change his view, and he's not going to change your view like that. So until you can sit down and really,
So
Tom.
if I can ask you back to your project and all, are you looking for investors? You're a private-owned company, of course.
yeah, we're private owned. It's myself, and I've got an investor partner who's been a long-time investor of mine since the mitigation business, and so we're really not looking for investors, but we are looking for more ways to get foundations or company like Duke Energy. They fund us a good bit. They give us money to help restoration efforts. People like that are looking to come in and help with the projects. But from an investment standpoint, we're not there yet. And I don't know if
Is
we
there
ever
any
would be.
interest in maybe going public one day, or is that
No.
probably not? Yeah. Okay. Just curious.
No, this is just something I want to do. And, I do it because it's fun.
Yeah.
And
It's an outdoor kind of job,
Yeah.
right? So you're
so
physical.
I'm on the coast,
You're
I'm out
physical.
there,
Yeah.
on the water, and I enjoy it. If I didn't enjoy it, I
Oh,
wouldn't,
yeah.
wouldn't do it.
It has to have a certain passion,
Yeah.
I would think, for sure. Yeah.
And so as long as we can keep funding, which our funding continually goes up, I think this year we're going to have about $750,000 in our program to go into the Clams. That's not just for us, but it's all costs included. And last year was 200.
Wow.
So as people start seeing what we're doing,
Have a larger
we're starting
market.
to collect more. People saying this is worthwhile. Let's put monies from here or here into it. And like one of them is Brevard County has a 1 cent sales tax for the Save Our Indian River Lagoon Fund, and so they're giving us money. And then DOT's got some projects that we're going to work. So there's a lot of money out there for restoration, but there are a lot of people looking for money for restoration. So it's
Competitive market,
Yeah.
just like well, not any other, but most others. But Ernest, anything else that you would like to cover about the work that you're doing, or maybe advice for a younger version of yourself, knowing that they want to get into some sort of environmental work, or even outside of environmental work, as pretty much everyone with an interesting past or interesting work that they're doing now. It's not a straight path, right? Anything that you've learned along the way that you would instill on a young up-and-comer like myself or someone else watching?
just do what you enjoy. If you don't enjoy it, you're not going to be very good at it. And like you're doing the drones, I mean, you're passionate about drones, and you love it, and so that's why you're doing it.
Yep.
I'm passionate about restoration.
Well, that and the millions of dollars we're making. That
Yeah. We're not really. We're about to get as a company where we're going to be self-sufficient. It's not a big money maker yet. I think it will be, but we've been funding this thing out of pocket for 5+ years. And so you got to have that passion and that drive and that don't give up.
Yep.
I mean, I've had a few people say, why are you still trying to do that? I was like, because I know it's going to work one day.
Yeah, and it already is, and that's the thing. Actually, on the way over, I was listening to some comedians talking about this idea that they're killing in obscurity, right? So they're doing great, right? Going from comedy show to comedy show, 100 people, 50 people, 300 people, a few thousand people at a time, making great impressions on those people. But the world at large has no idea that they're doing so well, right? And I think that's a lot of it is be fine killing it in obscurity, right?
Yeah.
Is what you're getting at.
Yes. And and all of our growth is organic. We aren't advertising, we aren't going out and calling on people. It's through people hearing about us and telling somebody, like the Disney deal.
Yeah.
I mean, hopefully that turns into something, but if it does, that'd be phenomenal. Get somebody big like that behind you. And we've talked about trying to go to SpaceX because their Cape Canaveral is in the Indian River Lagoon. But again, I think you kind of have to be invited to come see those guys.
Yeah.
So Elon, if you're
Right
listening,
time, right place. Oh, let me just give them a call after the show. I'll give them a call.
But people like that, and even NASA. I mean, when they launch those rockets, there's all kind of gases and debris and
Oh,
stuff.
geez, yeah.
And again, do we not push humanity and society forward, or because it's polluting the environment, right? And that's where I again don't want to get too far into this, but I feel like large part of society is, again, I don't know, I don't want to say like it's a conspiracy against the mass population. It kind of feels like that. Hey, you don't do anything that's gonna, affect the environment, but while us in this elite class, we fly around our private jets, we'll continue building all this technology that produces this waste, and you just rely on us, we'll take care of you. Don't worry about it.
Yeah.
But Ernest, thank you for making the trek to come join us today. Looking forward to seeing more of your work and working with you on it. But as you know, if there's anything that I can do to help, you know how to get a hold of me, and again, appreciate you coming and joining us today.
Great. Well, I appreciate the time.
Thank you.
All right, thanks, y'all.
Yeah, thank you.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.